Tonight, we step softly into a world shadowed by uncertainty. A world of narrow streets and heavy air, of church bells tolling in the distance, of doors marked with symbols that whispered quiet warnings to those who passed. We will journey into medieval Europe during one of its most unsettling chapters, the Age of Plague. But we will not rush. We will not dramatize. Instead, we will move gently through the rhythm of daily life, through the thoughts of witnesses, through the systems that carried disease across continents, and through the quiet contrast between suffering and privilege. This is not a story of spectacle. It is a story of endurance. And at the center of tonight's journey stands a peculiar figure, half physician, half symbol, the medieval plague doctor. As you settle in, imagine the cool stone of a city street beneath your feet, the faint scent of smoke in the air, the distant murmur of voices behind shuttered windows. Let your breathing slow. Let the modern world grow distant. And imagine yourself there. Imagine the weight of the coat before you even put it on. It hangs from a peg near the door, stiff with layers of wax and oil, heavy even in still air. When you lift it over your shoulders, the material does not drape so much as settle like a protective shell. It restricts your movement slightly. Your arms feel slower. Your breathing grows warmer beneath its folds. The coat is not comfortable. It is not tailored. It is armor of a different sort, designed not against swords, but against something invisible. You fasten it carefully. Then the gloves. Leather, sometimes treated with more wax. They make your fingers clumsy. You will need those fingers to feel pulses, to inspect swollen glands, to mix herbs, to write notes with ink that blots easily on coarse paper. Finally, the mask. The beak is longer than your own face, projecting forward like the bill of a strange bird. Inside, small pouches hold dried flowers and spices. Lavender, mint, cloves, perhaps camphor if it can be found. The theory is simple: bad air carries disease. Sweet air protects. When you tie the straps behind your head, your field of vision narrows. Glass lenses cover your eyes. They fog slightly with your breath. Sounds are muffled. Your own breathing echoes back to you in a slow, steady rhythm. Inhale. Exhale. The world becomes distant, filtered. You step into the street. It is early morning. Mist clings to the cobblestones. A cart rattles somewhere far off. Normally, the city would be waking, bakers lighting ovens, vendors setting up stalls, apprentices sweeping thresholds. Now, many shutters remain closed. In times of plague, routine fractures. You pass a church where candles flicker inside, even at dawn. Prayer has become constant. A few figures kneel, heads bowed. The priest's voice murmurs steadily, a low thread of sound in the cold air. You continue walking. Your contract with the town requires daily visits to infected households. In some cities, plague doctors were appointed by municipal councils and paid from public funds. In others, they were hired privately by wealthier families. Often, they were not the most experienced physicians. Those tended to flee early outbreaks. Instead, plague doctors were sometimes younger men seeking opportunity, or practitioners with limited prospects elsewhere. It is not necessarily prestige that brought you here. It is necessity. You reach a narrow lane where wastewater trickles along shallow gutters. Medieval urban sanitation is inconsistent at best. Chamber pots are emptied into the street. Livestock wander freely. Grain is stored in crowded warehouses. Ships arrive from distant ports, carrying goods, and sometimes unseen passengers in the fur of rats. But you do not know about bacteria. You do not know about Yersinia pestis. You understand the world through the balance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. You understand that corrupted air, miasma, brings illness. You believe strong scents can counteract it, so you carry herbs. You carry vinegar. You carry confidence, even if you must summon it deliberately. At the first house, the door opens only a crack. Inside, the family has rearranged their lives around illness. A pallet has been placed near the hearth. The patient lies there, sweating despite the chill. The room smells of damp wool, smoke, and something faintly metallic in the air. You kneel. Through the gloves, you feel for a pulse. You ask quiet questions. How long has the fever lasted? When did the swelling appear? Has anyone else in the household fallen ill? They watch you carefully. They want certainty. You offer what reassurance you can, though your tools are limited. Perhaps you lance a swelling to release pressure, done quickly, without ceremony. Perhaps you recommend herbal compresses or controlled bleeding, in keeping with accepted practice. You may suggest isolation, instructing the family to limit contact. But in a small house with one main room, isolation is a fragile concept. Before leaving, you make a mark in your ledger. Name, address, condition, date. The act of writing feels grounding. It gives shape to chaos. Outside again, you pause. The air feels thin and cold compared to the interior warmth. You inhale through the herbs in your mask. The scent has grown fainter since dawn. This will not be your only visit today. You move from house to house. Some doors do not open at all. In certain cities, infected homes were marked. Guards might stand nearby to prevent residents from leaving. Supplies are left outside. Families are sealed within. You may be one of the few permitted to enter. The streets grow quieter as the day progresses. Markets shrink. Travelers avoid the gates. Rumors circulate more quickly than official proclamations. Some believe the disease is divine punishment. Others blame foreigners or marginalized communities or unseen conspiracies. Fear seeks explanation. As a plague doctor, you exist in an uneasy space. You are needed, and you are feared. Children sometimes follow you at a distance, fascinated by the mask. Adults step aside. Your silhouette against the gray stone becomes symbolic of illness, of authority, of mortality. The bells ring often. Each toll marks another passing. There are days when exhaustion seeps into your bones. The coat chafes at your neck. Sweat gathers under the mask. Your vision blurs slightly from the glass lenses. You long to remove the layers, to breathe unfiltered air, but you hesitate. Protection, however imperfect, feels essential. Meals are irregular. Appetite fades in the presence of constant illness. Bread tastes dry. Water tastes flat. Even wine, once a comfort, carries a hint of unease. At night, you return to your quarters. You hang the coat carefully. You empty the herb pouches and replace them when you can. Supplies are not infinite. In prolonged outbreaks, even simple materials grow scarce. Trade slows. Caravans avoid afflicted cities. Ports impose restrictions. Your income may be steady for now, but it depends on crisis. Without plague, your position vanishes. You sit at a small table by candlelight and review your notes. Numbers rise. Then perhaps they plateau. Then rise again. The pattern feels unpredictable. Sleep comes slowly. You listen for coughing in neighboring rooms. For footsteps outside. For the distant rumble of carts carrying bodies to burial grounds beyond the walls. Mass burials occur not from cruelty, but from necessity. The number of dead can outpace the capacity of individual graves. Large pits are dug. Bodies are laid in careful rows when possible. Earth is returned quietly over them. The work is methodical. You may witness this from a distance. You record the totals. And then the next morning, the knocking begins again. Over time, the repetition shapes you. Fear does not vanish, but it becomes familiar, like a background hum. You learn to move steadily despite it. You speak in calm tones, even when answers are uncertain. You become practiced at entering rooms where others hesitate. Yet you remain human. You wonder if the herbs truly help. You wonder if the code is enough. You wonder if history will remember your work, or forget it entirely. When outbreaks finally subside, cities emerge changed. Populations shrink. Labor becomes scarce. Wages shift. Social structures strain. But during the height of plague, you cannot see these long-term transformations. You see only the day before you. Another street, another door, another family waiting for reassurance. It is not glory, it is endurance. And as you walk beneath gray skies, the rhythm of your breathing echoing inside the beak-shaped mask, you understand that your role is less about curing and more about witnessing. Witnessing suffering, witnessing resilience, witnessing the slow, relentless passage of disease through a crowded medieval world. Inhale, exhale. The bells continue to ring, and you continue to walk. As we gently move away from the waxed cloak and herb-filled mask of the plague doctor, we step into a different kind of presence. Not a healer of bodies, but an observer of souls. Not a man walking through infected streets, but one seated quietly with parchment, watching his world change. His name was Giovanni Boccaccio. He was not a physician. He did not bleed patients or mix poultices. Yet his account of the Black Death remains one of the most enduring windows into that terrible year of 1348. Imagine Florence before the plague. A city alive with textile workshops, merchant houses, ringing church bells, and the murmur of trade negotiations. The Arno River flowing steadily beneath its bridges. Market stalls layered with dyed wool, spices, and grain. Narrow streets echoing with footsteps and conversation. Boccaccio knew this city intimately, and then gradually something shifted. He describes how the illness appeared suddenly. At first, rumors, then small clusters of sickness. Then, within weeks, an undeniable pattern. People who had been walking in the morning were bedridden by evening. Households that had been full of laughter fell silent. In the introduction to the Decameron, Boccaccio writes not with frantic urgency, but with steady observation. His words carry a controlled clarity. He notes how physicians, trained in classical texts and confident in their learning, found themselves uncertain. Remedies that had once seemed dependable were now ineffective. Learned theories faltered, and beneath that failure of medicine, something deeper began to unravel. Boccaccio observed how fear altered behavior. Some citizens withdrew completely, sealing themselves inside their homes. They lived sparingly, avoiding excess food or drink, believing moderation might preserve their health. Windows were closed, contact minimized. They spoke only with a small circle of trusted companions. Others responded in the opposite way. They gathered in taverns, drinking heavily, laughing loudly, as if daring fate to interrupt them. They reasoned that since life was fragile, it should be filled with pleasure while it lasted. The city in these months became a landscape of extremes, strict isolation and reckless abandon existing side by side. And then there were those who fled. Country villas outside Florence filled with those wealthy enough to escape. Servants accompanied them. Supplies were carried out of the city. Gates closed behind them. Boccaccio does not condemn or praise these actions. He simply records them. He writes of families fractured by fear, of brothers hesitant to approach brothers, of parents avoiding children, of funerals reduced to swift, almost mechanical affairs. Bells tolled so often that their sound became part of the background rhythm of the city. He notes how burial customs changed. Coffins were scarce. Graves were dug quickly. Sometimes several bodies shared a single pit, covered in layers of earth. Yet even here, his language remains measured. He focuses not on physical detail, but on atmosphere, the quiet heaviness that settled over Florence. The way ordinary routines dissolved. The way markets thinned. The way doors remained shut. Imagine Boccaccio sitting near a shuttered window. The air outside warm and strangely still. Perhaps he hears distant cart wheels moving slowly over stone. Perhaps the scent of incense drifts faintly from a nearby church. He writes deliberately. He chooses to frame his experience not as a chronicle of horror, but as a setting for storytelling. In the Decameron, 10 young Florentines, 7 women and 3 men, retreat to a countryside villa to escape the plague. There, over 10 days, they tell 100 stories. Why stories? Because storytelling imposes structure. Each day has a theme. Each participant speaks in turn. A leader is chosen. There is order, even if the world outside feels uncertain. In this structure, Boccaccio creates a kind of sanctuary. The villa becomes a symbolic refuge, not only from disease, but from chaos. The characters speak of love, fortune, wit, deception, loyalty. Their tales range from humorous to reflective, but always grounded in the complexity of human behavior. It is as if Boccaccio is quietly reminding his readers that even in times of immense loss, human nature continues. People still seek connection. They still argue, laugh, admire, and hope. And this may be his most profound contribution. While plague doctors confronted the immediate crisis, the fevered brow, the anxious family, the sealed door, Boccaccio captured the psychological landscape. The slow erosion of trust, the redefinition of community, the question that lingered in every mind, who would remain? He also understood something about memory. The plague would pass. It would not disappear completely, but the initial wave would recede. Survivors would rebuild. Markets would reopen. Fields would be replanted. But without witnesses, the emotional truth of that moment might fade. So he wrote, not with dramatic flourish, not with heated accusation, but with calm description. He describes how servants sometimes refused to attend their masters, how priests hesitated before entering infected homes, how people carried sprigs of herbs or flowers, believing fragrant air might protect them. He does not mock these actions. He presents them as part of the rhythm of fear. And perhaps what is most striking is the absence of moral panic in his tone. He does not portray the plague as divine wrath in vivid detail. He acknowledges religious interpretations, but he focuses instead on human reaction. There is something deeply steady in that approach. Imagine the young storytellers seated in a garden outside Florence. The plague still active in the city, yet at a distance. They recline beneath trees. They speak one after another. The air carries the faint hum of insects. A servant refills a cup of watered wine. The rhythm of their days becomes predictable. Morning conversation, afternoon storytelling, evening reflection. Within that rhythm, fear softens. Boccaccio gives us a rare perspective, not the battlefield, not the operating room, but the interior life of a society under strain. Through him, we glimpse how people adapt not only physically but socially, how class boundaries blur when labor becomes scarce, how grief reshapes priorities, how the awareness of mortality sharpens both generosity and selfishness. He writes as someone both inside and outside the catastrophe, close enough to feel its weight, distant enough to analyze its patterns. And this balance mirrors the plague doctor himself. Both men, in their own ways, walked alongside death, one with a beaked mask and gloved hands, the other with ink-stained fingers and patient observation. As we let the image of Boccaccio fade, his candle burning low, his manuscript slowly filling with careful script, we begin to widen our view even further. From Florence, the plague did not remain still. It traveled, quietly, persistently, along sea routes and caravan trails, through bustling ports and inland towns. In our next segment, we will follow that slow movement across continents, examining how the Black Death spread, not as a sudden storm, but as a series of small arrivals that reshaped the medieval world. Let us now widen the lens. We move away from Florence, from Boccaccio's quiet garden and shuttered windows, and we imagine the wider world of the 14th century. A world without engines or telegraphs. A world connected not by wires, but by wind and hoof and sail. The Black Death did not erupt everywhere at once. It traveled, slowly, steadily, almost invisibly at first. Most historians trace its devastating European arrival to the mid-14th century, though its deeper origins likely lay farther east, along the trade arteries that connected China, Central Asia, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean. These were not isolated regions. They were bound together by the intricate web of the Silk Roads and maritime commerce. Imagine a caravan crossing the vast plains of Central Asia. Camels step rhythmically across dry earth. Bales of silk and spices are stacked high. Merchants ride in measured silence, the wind tugging at their cloaks. Among them, unseen, something else travels. The bacterium we now know as Yersinia pestis moved through rodent populations, particularly black rats, that lived alongside human settlements. Fleas, tiny and unnoticed, carried the infection from rodent to rodent. When food sources dwindled or rat populations died off, those same fleas sought new hosts. Often that meant humans, but none of this was understood in the 14th century. To medieval minds, disease was a mystery. It was foul air, divine punishment, corrupted humors, or ill-aligned stars. Germs were centuries from discovery. The first dramatic European outbreak is often associated with the Crimean port city of Kaffa in the 1340s. Kaffa was a bustling trade hub, a meeting point of Genoese merchants and Mongol forces. The story, recounted by later chroniclers, tells of a Mongol siege in which plague-infected bodies were reportedly hurled over the city walls. Whether this account is fully accurate remains debated. But what is certain is that ships left Kaffa in 1347 carrying more than grain and fabric. They carried rats and fleas. Picture a merchant vessel rocking gently on the Black Sea. The hold is dim and crowded. Crates stacked tightly. Grain sacks piled high. Rats scurry in the shadows, perfectly at home among the cargo. The ship reaches Constantinople, then Messina in Sicily, then Genoa, then Marseille. At each port, goods are unloaded. Sailors step onto the docks. Trade resumes. Conversations are exchanged. Hands clasp in greeting. And within days, within weeks, fevers begin. The spread was not explosive in a modern sense. It moved with the speed of trade, measured by wind and weather. A few months in one region, then another. By 1348, much of Italy was afflicted. From there, it advanced into France, Spain, and the German states. England was reached by 1348 to 49. Scandinavia soon followed. Each town experienced the arrival differently. Imagine a quiet English village. A cart arrives from a nearby market town. A trader complains of feeling unwell. Within days, his household is struck by sudden fever and swelling. Word spreads, but there is little understanding. Priests are summoned. Herbs are burned. Windows are opened to allow fresh air. Bells toll. And then the illness appears in neighboring homes. In cities, the effect was magnified by density. Narrow streets, shared wells, crowded homes, all created ideal conditions for rapid transmission. Urban centers became pockets of intense mortality, but rural areas were not spared. The disease followed roads, riverways, and pilgrim paths. It crossed mountains and forests. It traveled aboard fishing boats along northern coasts. Contemporary observers described it as unstoppable, not because it moved quickly in hours or days, but because it continued, month after month. In some regions, mortality rates reached staggering levels, perhaps 1/3 or more of the population. Exact numbers remain debated, as medieval record-keeping was inconsistent. Yet the demographic impact was unmistakable. Fields lay untilled. Workshops fell silent. Entire households vanished. But again, we maintain our calm perspective. We focus not on individual suffering, but on patterns. The plague did not burn uniformly. Some communities were devastated. Others experienced lower mortality. Some cities saw repeated waves. Others were spared for years. Climate may have played a role. Rodent ecology certainly did. Trade intensity mattered. Isolation provided temporary protection. There were also secondary waves. The Black Death was not a single event, but the beginning of a long relationship between Europe and recurrent plague outbreaks. The initial pandemic of 1347 to 1351 was the most severe, but subsequent flare-ups continued for centuries. Imagine living in a town in the late 14th century. The first outbreak has passed. Survivors rebuild. Crops are planted again. New apprentices take the places of lost craftsmen. Marriages are arranged among a smaller pool of families. And then, perhaps 10 or 20 years later, whispers return. A neighboring city reports sudden illness. Bells ring once more. The rhythm of medieval life becomes punctuated by uncertainty. Yet amid this, adaptation occurs. With fewer laborers available, surviving peasants sometimes demanded higher wages. In England, this shift contributed to tensions that would later erupt in events like the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. Across Europe, traditional feudal bonds were strained. Landowners found themselves negotiating rather than commanding. Guild structures adjusted. Urban planning slowly evolved, with greater attention paid to sanitation in some regions. Trade networks, despite their role in spreading disease, did not collapse entirely. They contracted, then resumed. Merchants continued to travel. Ships continued to sail. The world did not end. It changed. And this slow, continent-wide transformation is perhaps the most significant consequence of the Black Death's spread. Not just the loss of life, but the restructuring of society. Imagine looking at a map of Europe before 1347. Densely populated cities, thriving villages, expanding frontiers. Now imagine that same map after 1351. The outlines remain. Rivers still flow. Mountains still rise. But within those boundaries, silence occupies many spaces. A generation gone. A workforce diminished. Traditions interrupted. And yet, children are still born. Markets reopen. Church services resume. The plague moved like a tide, rolling in, retreating, leaving behind altered shores. As we allow this image to settle, the quiet advance of disease across trade routes, the creak of ships in harbor, the flicker of candles in infected homes, we gently prepare to shift our attention once more. From the movement of the plague itself, we will turn to the physical traces it left behind, to the earth disturbed by hurried burials, to the archaeological discoveries that centuries later reveal how medieval communities responded to overwhelming mortality. In our next segment, we will explore mass graves and what they quietly tell us about resilience, ritual, and adaptation. Let us now step away from chronicles and shipping routes. Instead, we move quietly beneath the soil. Centuries have passed. The noise of the 14th century has faded. The cries in the streets, the tolling bells, the hurried prayers, they are long silent. But the earth remembers. Imagine standing in a modern city, perhaps London, perhaps Florence. Traffic hums. People move with purpose. Buildings rise in stone and glass. Beneath the pavement, beneath layers of later centuries, lie traces of another time. When construction workers dig foundations, when archaeologists carefully remove layers of soil, they sometimes encounter something unexpected. Rows of skeletons, laid side by side, sometimes orderly, sometimes hurried. Mass graves. The phrase itself may sound dramatic, but let us approach it calmly. During the worst months of the Black Death, ordinary burial practices became difficult to maintain. Parish graveyards filled quickly. Clergy died alongside their congregations. Laborers who might dig graves were themselves ill. In some towns, temporary burial pits were created, large trenches designed to accommodate many bodies at once, not as acts of neglect, but as practical responses to overwhelming numbers. Imagine a team of exhausted men digging a long, rectangular trench outside a city wall. The air is cool. The soil is heavy and damp. They work steadily, not speaking much. There is no ceremony beyond necessity. Bodies are wrapped, sometimes in simple shrouds. Occasionally, a rosary bead or small token remains with the deceased. They are placed carefully, often in rows. Even in crisis, there is an effort at dignity. Archaeological excavations in places like East Smithfield in London have revealed such sites. The East Smithfield Cemetery, established specifically during the Black Death of 1348–49, offers a rare and well-documented example. Here, hundreds of individuals were buried in an organized manner. When modern archaeologists uncovered these graves, they did not find chaos. They found structure, rows aligned, bodies placed with care, some stacked in layers, but not haphazardly. It suggests that even during the height of fear, communities attempted to preserve ritual and respect. Bones, when studied, tell quiet stories. Teeth preserve traces of childhood nutrition. Bones reveal signs of past injuries healed long before plague struck. Some skeletons show markers of hard labor, thickened joints, worn vertebrae. Others appear more robust. Interestingly, analysis of plague cemeteries indicates that the disease did not discriminate purely by social class or prior health. Both the strong and the frail succumbed. Yet some research suggests that those who survived may have been somewhat more resilient overall. In the aftermath, Europe's surviving population may have experienced slight improvements in health due to better access to food and resources. Imagine holding a fragment of pottery found beside a burial pit, or a simple belt buckle. Small, ordinary objects. They remind us that these were not anonymous masses, but individuals with routines and relationships. Archaeology removes the drama. It replaces panic with measurement. Soil layers are mapped. Carbon dating is performed. DNA samples are extracted carefully from teeth, where plague bacteria may still be detected in trace amounts. In fact, modern science has confirmed the presence of Yersinia pestis DNA in several Black Death burial sites. The invisible traveler we spoke of earlier has left molecular fingerprints. Picture a laboratory. Bright lights, white coats, a bone fragment resting under magnification. Researchers examine sequences of ancient DNA, reconstructing the pathogen's genetic structure. It is a strange continuity, 14th century tragedy studied with 21st century tools. And yet, even here, there is calm. The earth did not preserve scenes of horror. It preserved patterns, placement, context. Mass graves are not monuments of chaos. They are records of adaptation under strain. In some cities, plague cemeteries were located outside normal parish boundaries, reflecting attempts to manage contagion according to contemporary beliefs about miasma or corrupted air. In others, churchyards were simply expanded. There are also sites where burials continued individually, though at a rapid pace. Not every community resorted to large trenches, and in rural areas, the archaeological footprint is sometimes lighter. Lower population density meant smaller burial clusters, sometimes difficult to distinguish from ordinary mortality over time. Imagine walking through a modern meadow in the English countryside. Sheep graze peacefully. Beneath your feet, unknown to you, may lie the remains of a medieval hamlet that vanished during the plague years. Some villages were never repopulated. Known today as deserted medieval villages, these sites appear in tax records before 1347 and disappear afterward. No dramatic ruins, just faint earthworks, subtle depressions where houses once stood, the silence of abandonment. Archaeology then does not shout, it whispers. It tells us that the Black Death was not only a story of suffering, but of system failure and system recovery. Burial infrastructure strained and then adjusted. Religious practice bent, but did not completely break. Even artistic representations shifted. After the plague, themes of mortality, such as the danse macabre, appeared more frequently in European art. Skeletons dancing with kings and peasants alike. A reminder that death visited all classes. But again, these are symbolic reflections, not scenes of gore. The medieval world absorbed the shock and expressed it in culture. Now imagine standing at the edge of one of these excavated burial pits. The skeletons have been studied, catalogued, reinterred with care. The trench is once again filled. Grass grows above. Time smooths even the sharpest events. And as we let this image settle, the quiet earth, the layered soil, the gentle hum of modern life above ancient graves, we begin to shift our focus once more. From the physical evidence of death, we turn toward how people attempted to prevent it, how medieval medicine, belief, and superstition shaped responses to plague. In our next segment, we will explore physicians, herbal remedies, protective clothing, and the theories that guided treatment in an age before germ theory. Let us now widen our view. We step away from the narrow street, away from the apothecary's shelves, and rise slowly, gently above the city walls. From this higher vantage point, we begin to see something larger. Threads stretching outward, roads winding through countryside, rivers flowing toward distant ports. The plague did not remain confined to one town or one kingdom. It moved, and it moved along the same routes that carried silk, spices, wool, silver, and stories. Imagine a merchant caravan traveling across Central Asia decades before the plague reaches Europe. Camels step steadily through dust. Bales of fabric are tied securely. Metalware clinks softly with each movement. These caravans are part of vast networks that historians refer to collectively as the Silk Roads. Though in truth they were many roads, intersecting, branching, reconnecting. The bacterium that causes plague, Yersinia pestis, circulates naturally among rodent populations in certain regions. Fleas feed on infected animals. When rodent populations die off, fleas seek new hosts. Sometimes those hosts are humans. Trade routes are not only paths of commerce. They are corridors of contact. Goods move, people move, animals move, and with movement comes transmission. Picture a bustling port city on the Black Sea in the early 14th century. Perhaps Caffa, a Genoese trading colony. Ships dock in crowded harbors. Sailors unload cargo. Grain sacks are carried below deck. Rats slip quietly between ropes and crates. The plague may have entered Europe through maritime trade, though its exact path remains debated among historians. What is clear is this: ships were ideal vessels for disease. Dark holds, stored food, close quarters, long voyages. A rat can board unnoticed. A flea can cling invisibly. A sailor can fall ill days after departure. Now imagine a merchant vessel sailing toward Italy. The sea is calm. The journey is routine. The crew notices nothing unusual at first. Then one sailor develops fever. He weakens quickly. Others follow. By the time the ship approaches port, several men are ill. The harbor authorities hesitate. But trade must continue. Cargo must be delivered. The ship docks. The infection steps ashore. From port cities, Messina, Genoa, Venice, the plague radiates inland along established commercial roads. Pack animals carry goods toward market towns. Traders stop at inns. Pilgrims travel toward shrines. Soldiers march between garrisons. Europe in the 14th century is more interconnected than we sometimes imagine. Grain flows from countryside to city. Wool travels from England to Flanders. Wine moves along river systems. Markets depend on regular exchange. Each exchange is an opportunity. The disease does not understand borders. It does not pause at toll gates. It follows patterns of human organization. You might imagine yourself as a small merchant traveling from town to town. Your cart creaks softly along a dirt road. You sleep in roadside inns, sharing meals with strangers. You handle coins passed from many hands. You are part of the network. The same network that sustains livelihoods now quietly sustains contagion. Inland towns begin to report similar symptoms. Swellings, fever, sudden weakness. Local physicians exchange letters, attempting to describe what they see. Rumors travel faster than official reports. Markets thin out. Merchants hesitate to enter heavily affected cities. Some trade routes temporarily collapse. Prices fluctuate. Scarcity emerges in certain regions. Yet in other places, denial persists. Surely the disease will pass. Surely it will not reach this village, this valley, this distant castle. But gradually, steadily, the web tightens. By 1348 and 1349, much of Europe is affected. The speed astonishes contemporaries. It is important to note that medieval trade was not reckless or ignorant. It was structured, regulated, and often cautious. But no one yet understands microbial transmission. The idea of quarantine begins to take shape in response. In 1377, the Adriatic port city of Ragusa, modern Dubrovnik, implements a system requiring arriving ships and travelers from infected areas to wait for a designated period before entering the city. This early quarantine is a significant development in public health history. Isolation becomes a tool. Cities construct pest houses outside walls to house the sick. Gates close earlier. Travel restrictions are enforced intermittently. But enforcement is inconsistent. Economic survival competes with safety. Feudal economies depend on labor and exchange. If trade stops entirely, shortages deepen. Lords cannot collect rents. Urban artisans cannot sell goods. Rural producers cannot access markets. The plague exposes how interdependent medieval society has become. And as transmission continues, the economic consequences accumulate. Labor shortages become acute. Fields go untilled. Workshops fall silent. Surviving workers discover that their labor has become more valuable. Wages begin to rise in some regions. This creates tension. Landowners, accustomed to fixed obligations, resist paying higher wages. Governments attempt to regulate compensation. In England, the Statute of Labourers in 1351 tries to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. But enforcement proves difficult. The disease that traveled along trade routes now reshapes the very structure of economic relationships. The flow of goods slows. The flow of power shifts. It is a quiet revolution, gradual, uneven, but profound. As you imagine the roads once more, dusty, winding, lined with hedgerows, you can almost sense the invisible current that once moved along them. Not visible, not dramatic, but steady. Trade routes connected continents, and in doing so, they connected vulnerabilities. Now, as we let the image of roads and ships fade into the distance, we turn inward again. How did these economic disruptions strain the feudal system? How did peasants, lords, and monarchs respond when old structures no longer held firm? In our next segment, we will explore feudal strain and the quiet rumblings of revolt. As the plague recedes, never entirely gone, but no longer burning through towns with the same intensity, the silence it leaves behind is profound. Fields lie fallow. Workshops stand half-used. Church pews are emptier. But the most significant absence is human. Entire families are gone. In some villages, half the population has vanished. In others, even more. The social fabric, once tightly woven through obligation, hierarchy, and tradition, has loosened. Before the plague, feudal society rested on a set of assumptions so deeply ingrained that few questioned them. Peasants worked the land. Lords owned the land. Labor was owed. Protection was promised. It was not equality, but it was structure. Predictable. Enduring. Now, predictability has fractured. Imagine yourself as a surviving peasant in 1350. You have endured the worst of the sickness. You have watched neighbors buried. You have felt hunger and fear, but you remain, and something has changed. There is more land available now, because fewer people are left to work it. Where once a landlord could demand labor service from many tenants, now he must negotiate with the few who remain. If he pushes too hard, you might leave. And there are other estates now desperate for workers. For perhaps the first time in generations, you possess leverage. It is subtle at first. A request for slightly better terms, a reduction in unpaid labor days, permission to pay rent in coin rather than service. In some regions, lords agree. They have little choice. They need harvests brought in. But elsewhere, authorities attempt to freeze society in place. In England, the government passes the Statute of Labourers in 1351, declaring that wages must return to pre-plague levels. Workers are forbidden from seeking higher pay. Movement between estates is restricted. The intention is stability. The effect is resentment. You, as a peasant, know your worth has increased. You know the fields cannot run without you. Yet the law insists nothing has changed. The tension simmers quietly for decades. Taxes rise as well. Governments, having lost significant revenue during plague years, seek to replenish their treasuries. Wars still require funding. Royal courts still require maintenance. In France, heavy taxation contributes to unrest. In England, the introduction of poll taxes, flat taxes levied on individuals, ignites frustration among common people already struggling with economic transition. By 1381, that frustration erupts in what historians call the Peasants' Revolt. It begins in Essex and Kent. Tax collectors are resisted. Records are burned. Groups of villagers begin marching toward London. Imagine walking in that procession. You are not heavily armed. You carry tools, perhaps a staff, perhaps nothing more than determination. You are not seeking chaos. You are seeking fairness. An end to rigid obligations. Relief from crushing taxation. The march is surprisingly organized. There is purpose, even discipline. When the rebels enter London, they do not initially descend into indiscriminate violence. They target symbols of authority, legal documents, certain officials. For a brief moment, it seems as though negotiation might be possible. King Richard II, still a teenager, meets with rebel leaders. Promises are discussed, but the fragile hope does not hold. Violence erupts. Leaders are executed. Royal authority reasserts itself. The revolt collapses. Yet something irreversible has occurred. The idea that peasants could collectively challenge feudal authority has entered the historical record. Even where revolts fail, economic reality continues to shift. Across Europe, serfdom begins to decline in many regions. Labor services are gradually replaced with monetary rents. Mobility increases. It is not immediate freedom. It is not universal change. In Eastern Europe, in fact, serfdom intensifies in later centuries. But in much of Western Europe, the Black Death accelerates transformation. Feudalism does not vanish overnight. It erodes. The plague, which seemed at first only destruction, becomes a catalyst. Now imagine returning to your village a few years after unrest has quieted. The fields are cultivated again. Children play in courtyards. Markets function, though differently than before. The hierarchy remains, but it feels less absolute. You still owe rent. You still answer to a lord. But negotiation has entered the equation. Power, once unquestioned, now feels slightly more fluid. The social pyramid has not toppled, but its foundation has shifted. And yet, while peasants navigate new opportunities and tensions, what of the nobles themselves? How did they endure the plague? How did they protect their estates? How did life within manor walls differ from the streets we first walked? In our final thematic segment, we will move behind those walls, into the quieter, more insulated world of noble life. Now, as the countryside slowly reorganizes itself, we step away from muddy lanes and crowded infirmaries. We pass through a gate. Stone replaces timber. Silence replaces shouting. You are no longer standing in a narrow plague-ridden street. You are approaching a manor house, perhaps modest by later standards, but formidable compared to the homes of peasants. Its walls are thick, its windows small and shuttered, its hall elevated above the damp ground. Inside, life is not untouched by plague, but it is buffered. Imagine yourself within these walls. The great hall is the heart of the manor. A long wooden table stretches beneath dark beams. Rushes cover the floor, replaced regularly to reduce odors. A hearth burns at one end, smoke curling upward toward a vent in the roof. Tapestries hang along the stone walls, not only for decoration, but for insulation. They soften echoes. They hold warmth. They depict hunting scenes, saints, heraldic symbols. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and beeswax. When plague rumors intensify, noble households often withdraw from urban centers. Country estates become refuges. Isolation becomes strategy. Unlike common townspeople, the nobility can reduce contact. Servants are limited. Visitors restricted. Supplies delivered carefully. In some cases, entire courts relocate. During outbreaks, royal families and high nobles move repeatedly, seeking regions less affected by disease. This mobility is a privilege. You, as a peasant, could not simply abandon your village. But here, within manor walls, daily rhythms continue with cautious adjustment. Meals are structured, almost ceremonial. Bread of fine wheat rather than coarse barley. Salted meats stored from previous seasons. Wine imported along trade routes that, ironically, also carried the disease. Even in plague years, hierarchy shapes experience. Nobles are not immune to infection. Many die. Entire aristocratic lineages are extinguished. But those who survive often do so with greater insulation, larger spaces, better nutrition, reduced crowding. Imagine the lord of this manor seated at the high table. He listens to reports from stewards about declining rents. Fields left untilled. Tenants lost. He calculates losses not in human sorrow, though sorrow exists, but in acreage, yield, revenue. The plague becomes an economic crisis as well as a spiritual one. Some lords respond with rigidity, enforcing pre-plague obligations. Others adapt, offering better terms to attract labor. Within the manor, literacy is more common. Documents are kept, accounts carefully recorded. Clerks tally grain stores. Stewards negotiate contracts. The estate becomes a center of administration in uncertain times. In private chambers, life is quieter still. A noblewoman oversees domestic management, linen inventories, preservation of food, supervision of servants. She may also oversee charitable distributions, alms given to the poor, perhaps in hopes of divine favor or simple compassion. Prayer remains constant. Private chapels within manor grounds allow worship without venturing into crowded parish churches. Candles flicker against painted saints. Latin prayers echo softly beneath stone ceilings. Even here, fear exists. News arrives slowly but persistently. A neighboring lord has fallen ill. A distant cousin has died. An entire village nearby has been abandoned. Mortality is universal, but environment shapes experience. While peasants face overcrowded huts and urban poor endure congested alleys, the nobility experience space. Distance, buffer. It does not guarantee survival, but it changes the texture of daily life. And as years pass, something else happens. With fewer noble heirs surviving, estates consolidate. Land passes through marriage alliances. Power reorganizes. The plague reshapes aristocratic networks just as it reshapes peasant labor. Behind manor walls, resilience is administrative as much as physical. Adaptation becomes policy. When you stand in that great hall, watching sunlight fall across long wooden tables, you sense continuity. The feudal order trembles, but it does not collapse. It adjusts. And so, from plague-ridden streets to insulated estates, we have traced the arc of a society under immense strain. Now, as candles burn low in the manor's private chapel, it is time to step back and reflect. Let us move gently into our conclusion. You have walked the narrow streets of a plague-stricken city. You have stood beside a physician in a beaked mask. You have listened to the careful words of Giovanni Boccaccio as he described a world undone. You have watched disease travel silently along trade routes, reshaping economies and hierarchies. You have stood in mass burial grounds, where archaeology quietly testifies to collective loss. You have felt the tension between peasants and lords. And finally, you have stood inside manor walls where privilege softened, but did not erase, the shadow of mortality. The Black Death was not merely an outbreak. It was a turning point, a reminder of fragility, a catalyst for change. Yet amid the loss, there was endurance. Fields were replanted, markets reopened, children were born. New social patterns emerged from old frameworks. If you compare that world to your own, your clean water, your quiet room, your distance from medieval contagion, you may sense the contrast. The air around you is not heavy with uncertainty. Your bed is not shared with livestock. Your city, however complex, is not defined by the tolling of plague bells. History, when viewed calmly, offers perspective. It reminds us that even in eras defined by hardship, humanity adapted. Slowly, imperfectly, persistently. And now, as you rest, let the images soften. The narrow streets fade. The manor hall grows dim. The candles burn lower. And the distant echoes of medieval life settle into quiet memory. You are here, safe, warm, breathing easily. Let that awareness remain as the past drifts gently into the background, and sleep comes quietly in its place.